If you think about building a personal brand as the uphill battle of becoming an influencer and building all these followers, of course you're going to feel like it's such a long way to getting the endpoint of, say, new business or a speaking gig. It doesn't have to be your brand colors, your headshots. You can make a weird headshot. Be yourself and know what you want, know what you believe, know your unique value. That unlocks so much in terms of getting to the next phase of whatever you're trying to get to.
I'm Margaret Kelsey.
And I'm Devin Bramhall.
And this is Don't Say Content,
a show created in partnership with Share Your Genius.
Your hair right now should be a personal brand, by the way. It is looking so fabulous. You look like Rachel in Friends in the 90s.
Rude.
Why is that rude?
I don't know. Like, I love Jennifer Aniston, but like her character in Friends wasn't my
You are
favorite.
nothing like her character at all. But your hair right now, for those who are only listening on podcast streaming, you're really missing out. You should look at our YouTube channel and see Devin's hair right now. It's fabulous.
You know what else someone said to me recently? And I fully didn't believe them, but I was like, say whatever you want. They're like, you remind me of Kendall Jenner.
I could see it.
And they were like, and I was like, which one's that? They were like, the one that doesn't wear a lot of makeup. And I was like,
yeah, the one that's a supermodel. That's an actual supermodel.
Oh, I don't see it, but I just thought, I always think it's funny when people say who you remind them of.
Well, do you watch Love is Blind?
No.
Okay. There's a show, Love is Blind, and they go into these pods and they have to like either get engaged or not before they see each other. And then they see each other. And there's a big scandal on this season because one of the women, they're not supposed to talk about looks, but this season, all of a sudden, everyone started talking about looks. And one guy's like, oh, do you ever get like a celebrity doppelganger? And to her credit, she says, I don't see it, but I get Megan Fox. And his eyes go googly and he ends up proposing to her. And then she doesn't not look like Megan Fox, but like, you know, she doesn't look like Megan Fox. And so now she's getting like skewered on the internet for being like, why does she think she looks like Megan Fox? And she literally said like, I don't see it, but I do get Megan Fox.
Oh,
yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah. Well, today's episode, I mean, this is a little bit of rambling, but today's episode, we're going back to talking about personal branding. So it is really funny to think about our own reflections with who we are, what we look like, how we're presenting to the world. And yeah, I brought all this rambling back into the actual show. You're welcome.
We're getting so good at this. We really are.
If you're listening to this podcast and you're like, let me start from the beginning, and back in season 1, we talked about personal branding.
I can recap some of the main things that we talked about. So one of the more tactical things that came up was around being a marketer trying to execute personal brand content for their executives. And you called them content facilitators, which I thought was really cool. And you said the characteristics that were important there were no recent graduates, make it easy for the executive to review and sort of make sure that you're responsible for adding in the CTAs, like make it actual marketing, give it a marketing objective, as it were. And you spoke about the 3 questions to facilitate content from experts. The first one, so like if you're not the expert, but you need to ask an expert questions.
And you don't even know where to begin. Like, how do I even ask a topic, right?
Yeah, these are like generally applicable questions that you can use. One of which says, what did you recently learn about that you wish you'd known either earlier in your career, recently? What's something you have contrarian views on? And what positive or negative changes do you see happening in the industry right now or ecosystem? I thought those are really clever ways of not only extracting information from your executive without being an expert, but you could ask those of yourself to help you establish what your beliefs are in your own brand.
Yeah. And also, if you go to a cocktail party and you have no idea what the person's talking about with their industry of what they do, you can also ask those questions to just try to get them to talk about something.
Oh my gosh. I was in DC recently visiting my friend Robin Showers, and she and her husband are like the coolest people in the world. And you can tell they know like really cool people. But I was like, oh my God, it's DC. And meeting their friends and stuff, I wondered if I was going to be able to
You're like, everyone's gonna be on the up with, like, the latest politics that you weren't able to read over on the way down, like, everyone's in it. I do get a little intimidated like that too.
Yeah, but they're so down to earth that it didn't matter. We went to an art show, and so that was, like, a friendly environment, but they invited me to his birthday party, and I was like, "Oh, no. I gotta practice. I gotta practice and come armed." And then, I had sort of chimed in with another option around, like, challenging their assumptions, so using the example of interviewing these 2 execs and coming in, my first question to them was, "Why do you think yours is the best product to solve this problem?" And really catching them off guard, and I elicited some interesting responses. And we talked a lot about personal brand in the corporate context and how personal brand can help you grow the company. I think today what I'm more interested in is what personal brand currently does for individuals, especially in a world where there's waning trust among institutions and executives. It's folks who have multiple, maybe they have a full-time job, but they have other jobs on the side. Basically, you have multiple jobs to meet your income, and I was just thinking about how much more personal brand is important now for individuals because there's less of them working at companies. There's a growing cohort of people working for themselves, and they do need a little bit of that definition around their specialties, their beliefs, etcetera, in order to bring clients in.
Yeah. Okay, so this is how I've been thinking about it, and I actually had a conversation similar to this the other day when we were talking. I was talking to somebody about the fact that we all used to, like, humanity used to live in smaller communities, smaller pods, and they all knew who to trust, who was trustworthy, who was untrustworthy. They knew who to partner with, who to like. They knew reputation on a microcosm level. And I think that as we've seen then the industrial revolution moved people into cities, and then people became strangers and you kind of didn't know the social structure anymore. And so then there's things that came into play to try to figure out how to understand reputation, right? Even like credit scores and things like that came out of understanding like somebody's reputation, or wanting to quantify it. And then we think about even this next era of getting into an Uber. That's something you have to solve for, right? Is like, how do we know who to trust when now we're so globalized? And I think that this is an interesting thing to think about, where personal brand ultimately is now, especially since we work remote and there starts to be polywork, if that's going to be how I have to say it, especially in this new era. We have to think about the fact that it's not just a small community and maybe you used to always work in one city and everyone in the city knew you and knew who you were and knew your reputation was for work. But now, if you're going to be working remotely and for maybe multiple companies at a time all throughout the United States, or global, how do we as a social structure understand reputation if not for some sort of personal brand at scale, right?
Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of the trends that we're seeing around personal brands needing to be authentic, transparent, emotionally driven, vulnerable, because that seems to be what is leading to trust right now. That wasn't necessarily the case. I mean, if you think about the antiquated views of personal brand, it was your logo, it was your value prop, your brand, the story of your career and your talents, etcetera. And now it looks completely different. So when I see folks who are resistant to the concept of personal brand, they're really carrying with them those assumptions of, "Hi, I'm so and so, and I have a book, and I speak, and I'm out there on the web, I'm out there in the world." It's like you can build a really solid personal brand within a very small community, and I think the benefit of it that I've seen is largely career related, where it's really helped me with career transitions, moving from one type of work to another. It's helped me move up within my career as well, and it's sort of like opportunity on opportunity, and I think internally as well, thinking about your personal brand in relation to the other folks in your company, it can help you as well. Just be more consistent, think more objectively. So, I don't think it has to be as, like, traditional. I don't think you need to do all of that traditional brand work to build your personal brand, but I do think it's a career catalyst.
Yeah. Well, I think in the first episode, we really differentiated between like, it doesn't have to be that building your personal brand has to be done online and like through social channels, right? Like, we were talking a lot about this idea that no matter what, you have a personal brand, and the channels in which you activate it might be all one-on-one channels, right? It might be every time you have a conversation, and you do have a personal brand whether or not you're tending to it or not, which is the other kind of misconception, is you'll have a brand whether or not you understand even how people are perceiving you. And so that self-reflection of making sure that you're going to be perceived and your personal brand is going to be stood up in the way that you would feel comfortable with, I think is really important, but it doesn't have to be on social channels.
I have a really good example of that from myself recently. People were starting to say, "Oh, you're the one who hates playbooks." Because I would go on podcasts and trash playbooks. And when I was building my consulting business, I took that thing that was known about me that I very strongly believe in, and transformed it into my headline. It says, "Great leaders don't follow playbooks." And so it was a perfect example of something that emerged where I was like, wait, I do believe that. And I think it's a unique lens through which I help clients. So I just turned it into my personal brand and owned it, and it's much more powerful. Yeah.
That's a really funny thing because oftentimes we don't even realize the things that we repeat so often because it's just like it just is in our brain and pops right out. I think the opposite side of that is like every time that you're trying to do a branding campaign in a company, you have to be really thoughtful about getting everyone to repeat something all of the time. But for you, there's just like that thing you believed in and you repeat it all the time. And then you start hearing it back to you. People are like, oh, let me reflect back to you what I always hear you say. And then you can be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to either dive into that or not. But I think it's great to dive into, right?
Yeah. Another personal experience last year, when I left animals and started doing consulting, just fell into it. And then when I took a step back and was trying to figure out, like, what is my unique value? What do I want to offer as a service? And I really struggled to attract clients in the same way as I did in the beginning because I didn't know for myself what I was doing. And so my language was all too vague. And I really struggled. I was like, "Why don't people get what I do now?" I had to define it for myself and give people the words. And then the cool thing about that is that starts to attract the people that you want in your orbit for various reasons, whether it's for clients, whether it's for followers. And so it is very useful. And then on the internal company side, you can leverage that your personal brand as a way of building influence. To me, personal brand is just building influence.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing you say too is like there's two things here that I think are undervalued a lot of the time. The first is consistency slash repetition. This idea that you have to show up. The way my brain's pattern mapping it is even goes into that episode we had about how authentic you can be at work, where you are being authentic, but you're being the piece of yourself that is consistent in that value line or in that whatever, right? Like, I hate playbooks. I'm going to always show up as hating playbooks. And you're being authentic, but you're not being like, we were talking about how dangerous it is to be like, bring all of the messy humanness to work and that there should be some boundaries. And so the first thing that there is like the consistency and repetition.
I was thinking about on the trust thing, the idea is like personal brand as a trust builder. And I came across this post by a woman named Mindy Zisman. She runs her own consultancy. So she serves the insurance, compliance, and risk industries. And she was talking about, yeah, we're getting a lot of inquiries to do personal branding for insurance and risk executives. Here's why. And she mentioned the waning trust in government and media as sort of the primary thing. And then also some interesting things around how business purchases aren't driven by price today. It's more aimed on the trust you have with the company, buying from people you know and trust, and just a way of distilling the volume of brands that are out there.
Yeah. It makes so much sense to have this almost backtracking back to word of mouth, personal branding, trustworthiness as like innovation and tech starts to speed up because we as human beings are going to grasp at the thing that we know won't change, right? And all this other stuff is changing, but we know we can trust human beings. So let's go back to that. And I think we've even seen that a lot over the last year to couple years with B2B buying where there's so much more word of mouth happening. And that's a really hard channel to both track and also influence. And so most people will just forget about it rather than trying to think of the ways that they can influence it and nurture it. I see it everywhere, right? I see it in all of these different places where as technology continues to change so rapidly, I think this will only get more important and stronger, right? Is to really understand what you stand for and make sure that whatever channels or places you're showing up, that you're doing so in a way that is understood internally and externally.
Well, I think that might have something to do with this sort of recent rise of micro influencers where a brand goes to people like John Bonini is a great example of his newsletter. It's not like it's a small, it's thousands of people. I don't know how many thousands, but it's thousands. And it's not small. That's a lot of people. But compared to what a big brand it's not millions, which is what the brand is looking at. And seeing how working with influencers with millions of followers is sort of like the top of funnel problem that we used to have where, yeah, you can write a top of funnel article that brings a lot of traffic, but that traffic isn't necessarily gonna be relevant, isn't gonna necessarily bring in your buyer, and it's not necessarily gonna convert well once it gets there. And so the value of taking these more micro brands and working with them. And what's interesting about that too is we've been in talks with some brands about partnerships and things like that, and they're still having that struggle of building out a program that has impact that they can show because measuring the impact is important to the company. And goes back to your point about brand. And I agree on this case where you need to know that something you're doing is of value to the company because otherwise, if you can't report on that value to the company, you might as well not have done it, in which case they're going to think you failed, even though you didn't. But I do think that if you're working with someone who does have a strong personal brand, maybe it's 5,000 followers, but it's well defined, it's well articulated, it's sort of out there. That aids in how you can quantify, in a way, the impact that that person had through partnering with you.
Especially with like influencers, micro influencers everywhere in between. I think we look too much at like who is their audience, who are they trying to attract? And rather than that, it's also that layered on with what is the pain point that they talk a lot about? And are those people not just going to be part of our target audience or potential customers, but are they already seated with the fact that this pain point exists? And so one of the companies that I work with has had really a lot of success doing influencer partnerships, and they have one particularly that is great, not just for awareness and affinity, but actually bringing in conversions. And it's because this influencer is talking all the time of the intersection point of building a business that would need this software, right? And that cuspy point. So it's not just about the target audience, but it's really about the fact that they've already focused in on the pain point in which then the product's going to solve it. And so I think of that as like there's lots of B2C examples of that, of like the fit tea and the influencers and the whatnot. And if it's somebody that literally is maybe has a lot of the folks in the demographic, right? Like women in their 20s and 30s, but they've been an influencer about loving your body, the fit tea is not going to land the way it will be if it's an influencer that is constantly maybe more aspirational in body type. And so I think that's a thing we have to think about too. It's not just building an audience, but it's building an audience that has the pain point that then hopefully the partnership or the company partnership would benefit from.
Take our podcast and share your genius. Rachel and I knew each other from when I was working at Animals because I hired her to help us relaunch the Animals podcast. And her and I spoke after I left. And for her, it was like we speak about the types of problems that they solve. And we wanted to make it a podcast. And our influence wasn't as broad as Jay, as an example. Wasn't as broad as Jay, but it was very, very deep. You and I have a lot of friends. We have a lot of people we know who we've helped, and they knew that, right? And so, using us to facilitate introductions, really custom structuring the engagement to accomplish what they really want. Well, now you're closer to quantifying than you would be because she could say, "Oh, this intro turned into a customer because of you," right? Not that I want to focus too hard on the measuring piece of it, especially for companies. And I think that's where the whole idea of a smaller niche can be helpful. Like one of the folks that we're talking to now, our reach doesn't match theirs, they're interested because the things we talk about perfectly align with their product, and there's no template for this yet. So there's lots of custom ideas with them. I'm like, "Do you want me to propose something random?" I think I went to Riverside, they were like, "Will you just propose a bunch of ideas for us?" And I was like, "Yes." One of them was like a docuseries. I was like, "Well, we have the producers for it, so" small thing. One person I have to give a shout out to around personal brand is my friend Kate DeLeo, because this is, like, her specialty. She, like, does this for her consulting work. But she during my existential crisis that was the past year, she's someone who very quickly cut through all the noise in my head and was like, "You do this." And she was just helping me as a friend, and through that exercise and the things she gave me as homework, I started thinking that way more, and I'm more cognizant of repeating my beliefs instead of just randomly posting whatever I think about on LinkedIn that day. I'm starting to think more about, "Oh, how can I overall express a single message of who I am and what I believe?" I'm definitely not there yet, as everyone can tell. I talked about Ninja Turtles on Monday.
Yeah, this is the thing that comes up too is the idea that it almost becomes a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. This idea of like if you define who you are, if you define your values, if you defined the consistency in which you want to show up, and then you start showing up in those ways, to your point earlier of like what happens then is you attract the right people, you attract the right clients, you attract the right companies, and it feels almost like magic, right? It feels a little silly, but it feels and you and your mom always says, does that what is it? You what do you just
Go after eludes you, what you become, you attract.
yeah. And so there's a piece of this personal branding work that is to even understand who you want to be. So when you be that, then you can attract the right opportunities. And I think that's too much of like a soft skill or woo woo for some people to take time on. But for me, it's been the most impactful practice that I've had over the last year and a half, 2 years is to constantly look at it, define it, redefine it if it needs to change, but then also as I'm showing up on a daily and weekly basis to make sure that I'm within that realm of my own personal brand, my own value system, my own things that I care about.
I think there's 2 things in there. One, I have a very tangible example of how like, redefining who you are as your career change is important. When I was working at SpringPad, I had pivoted my career into content marketing, and I just started. I also had no idea what I was doing. Thank you, Brian Carr, for believing in me when I knew nothing and acknowledging that. I was early in my career and didn't really pay attention to LinkedIn. And I got a phone call one day from the president of a company, of a startup, and he said he was pitching me a customer support job because that was the last experience I'd ever updated. I didn't keep my profile updated. And I wrote him back politely. I said, "Thanks so much, but no, I do content marketing now." And he came back to me. So he engaged me further and said, "Well, hold on a second. Can we just get on a call?" And he basically asked me, like, "What do you want to do?" And I was able to pivot it into doing the job that I actually wanted. And I was kind of lucky in that, not lucky, I was tactful in that scenario to convert it into, and then I got myself into a manager role through it too. I was like, "Well, I'm a manager." Never managed people before. I had an intern. But think about it is like if he hadn't wanted that type of person, if I hadn't straddled content marketing and was able to leverage it, I would have never gotten an email in the first place. And then on the consistency front, I will never forget this thing that my friend Patrick Helen said to me a long time ago. He said, "I love how you're the exact same person everywhere you show up, from Twitter to in person." What that reminds me to do is remember that my career can change, my beliefs can change, and I can make those changes, and people will follow me along because there's an inherent consistency of who I am and sort of my core beliefs. And so it makes people who are worried about, like, I've been a customer support person, a content marketer, a CEO. Now, like, I've been so many different things and I've able to make that story succinct through myself.
That is so good because I do think that in terms of how we define ourselves, so often we cling so much to our job and our role. And this idea that like even your personal brand can be beyond that. It's not just that you are this person who does this thing, right?
More people are doing that now. If you looked at the average LinkedIn profile now, they'll be like, "I'm a growth marketer," and then you'll dig into their profile and see where they work. But they'll put the things they wanna be known by without putting, "I'm the VP of X at Y company." They're leaving the company out.
Yeah, but I think even beyond like I'm a growth marketer, right? It's like I'm a person who cares about XYZ thing or the red thread that's even beyond that. And I think you found a good kind of red thread throughout the customer support.
It was customer support, content, because I just put it all under community. I was like, "I'm a community builder," because they are very those 2 jobs should be at a good company very close together, and I was able to achieve that with the customer support team at Help Scout when I was a director of content. I actively integrated customer support, made them heroes, built up their personal brands at the company, as well as the founders, folks in product design. We've talked about this before, and Ashley and I spoke about it at length at Inbound and Marketing Profs last year, but just using the personal brands of select people at your company to build community in other areas like your developers and building developer community there and your customer support software. We were really popular among customer support folks because we showed up at events as humans. We built up the brands of Matt Patterson and Mo and others. And it works because then all of a sudden it's like your friends showing up. They were happy to see us. They were like, it didn't feel like a brand experience. It felt like a personal experience.
Yeah. That brings me to another conversation that I had recently where I was talking to somebody who's thinking about going out and starting to consult and freelance and go from an in-house role to her own business with her own marketing funnel and the whole shebang. And we were talking about how to do it. And I was like, well, we've talked about this before where the podcast always felt like a playground to us. It's not necessarily like a marketing lead gen thing. I think it helps over time for us to have strong personal brands that folks know what we think about and attract the right people and the stuff. But it wasn't like what the go to market motion is, right? This type of work, it's all relationship based. And I was thinking about it and I was like, what I do is I have a list, like an actual list of people who have connected me with folks or people that I know can connect me with folks. And I keep those relationships active, but they're like my friends. You know what I mean? Like it's not, I don't have anyone on that list that I like don't enjoy talking to. And it's so nice to have that overlap of it's my personal brand through my network. And I'm like thinking about the people that I just want to be friends with normally. Networking gets such a bad rap because it's like, I don't want to spend time with people that I don't like. And it's like with a good personal brand and very strong values and direction in your life, you could also just work with your friends.
Or maybe you don't have a large connected friend group in the area that you're going into. All you have to do is start conversations. This goes back to this sort of legacy concept of personal brand. Doesn't have to be the way you build yours. You could build yours through one-on-one conversations. That works. I was talking to my friend Alan Tellio, who used to run one of the Startup Institute program, and he pivoted. He went into consulting a little over a year ago, and he's doing great. And he just had a bunch of conversations with people, converted a percentage of those into clients, and has been able to maintain that strategy alone. He didn't go out and build a complex website. PS, don't do that. He didn't hire someone to do something on his LinkedIn. It's just like, yeah, I have a website that's basically one page that I'll build on over time just because I want to, but here's what I do, here's how to reach out to me. And you the same, just make available the things they need to trust you and reach out to you. And then I go out and have conversations with people. This recently, I was catching up with a friend and they were describing to me some challenges that they were having, and I said, "Hold on a second. You need to hire me." You know? And I think it's easier to do too once you approach it from that casual perspective of like, "Hey, what's going on in your company, in your world right now? What are you challenged by?" And I was reading some Medium post about personal brand because I, like, thought for some reason there would be a unique take somewhere. But there was one statement that this guy made. He says, "Stop worrying about followers and build a community instead." And I was like, "That's really it." If you think about building a personal brand as the uphill battle of becoming an influencer and building all these followers, of course you're gonna feel like it's such a long way to getting the endpoint of, say, new business or a speaking gig. But if you really take a different approach where it's like, yeah, you can just networking can look like you being active in the Discord communities that you love. It can look like having one-on-one conversations or starting a small newsletter. Like, it doesn't have to be your brand colors, your headshots, you can make a weird headshot. Be yourself and know what you want, know what you believe, know your unique value. That unlocks so much in terms of getting to the next phase of whatever you're trying to get to.
Going back to what you were saying about like the warm conversations or like the casual conversations, I have a friend, Amber, and we're friends in our early 20s. And she used to say, desperation is a stinky cologne. And I literally say it all the time now in business context. She was talking about it in dating context. I now say that in business context more than ever before. Yeah, desperation's a stinky cologne. Whatever you can do for your personal brand to stave off the stinky cologne smell, the better.
Just to give some recent examples, there's a few episodes in our new newsletter that we wanted input from others from. And I think I texted you. I laughed. I was like, duh hack on growing your following. I posted about needing CMOs to talk to me. And I was like, why are all of a sudden everybody following me? It's like, oh, and guess what? Talk about not being desperate. You put a call out for someone's opinion, and guess what? I mean, there was 100 people on that list, and which was really cool and awesome. So it's like stuff like that, or just even, I mean, I hate saying this because everyone's gonna want to punch me in the face, but it's like just putting out good content. Like, I did not do my part to promote the show in Q4 of last year. It was like the season 3, because I was doing these talks and learning I had cancer and dealing with that. And so like then we took 2.5 months off. And guess what happened? Like, we were quiet. We had a LinkedIn page that grew to a following that's now 155 people, and, like, we didn't do anything. I wrote to say, I was like, "Why do we have 155 followers? Like, this is so random." And again, it's not a lot, but it's like when you consider the fact that we were putting 0 effort into it before, and same with our LinkedIn channel, I was like, "Why are people following our LinkedIn channel? We haven't posted anything in months. And why are people subscribing to our newsletter? I haven't sent it out in months, like literal months." And then people started posting about it on LinkedIn, like fan favorite from Chili Pipers people, other individuals who are like, "I love this show, and here's all the reasons why." And I think, like, just putting out good content, knowing the problems of the people that you're talking to. Ugh,
This is the problem of the people that you're talking to is thumbs up showing up when you're doing videos.
yeah, like,
Yeah.
that works, and it does catch on.
And the consistency. So this is the thing that I recognized way back as an individual contributor in content marketing that was so frustrating to me when I was trying to manage Upward is that there is a piece of it where it's if you are putting out good content to the right audience, it's about the consistency and the longevity of that program, right? And people, I think also like I even know as a reader, a consumer of content, a consumer of podcasts and blogs and newsletters and stuff, if it's not going to show up in my inbox and become a habit of mine, I'm like hesitant to sign up for it or to get my heart set on it. Right. And I think I'm happy to read an article by somebody smart, but it's only if I see that they have repeatedly put out a newsletter for 6 months, 8 months that I would actually then want to sign up for their newsletter. And there's a piece of that of like, I want to know if it's going to be good that it happens all the time.
I was looking through what the people I follow were saying about personal brand, and I stumbled on this post from Brent Turner, who I know from the My Tech's Up event where he used to mentor startups way back when, and he wrote this one thing, and it starts with, "It turns out we may all be formerly chic, algorithmic, worry-warding, Nimcell wannabes who like zombie brands, hand-painted billboards, and smart things that won't run us over." And I was like, you know what I mean? And I was just like, "Oh, man, like, that is something that is, like, weird and totally caught my eye." Went to his newsletter and was like, "Oh, this was from 2022. I wonder if he's still publishing. I don't wanna mention it on the podcast if he's not still publishing the newsletter," which he is. So, it's just to your point there, and especially with podcasts, I mean, our producers were telling us there isn't saturation of podcasts because there's a very large number of podcasts that are started and then stopped.
start and stop, start and stop. And I think there's a piece of that where it's understanding the overlap of what you will be able to do consistently. Like if this was a podcast where I did it by myself, I would never be able to do it. Like I need you as a like accountability partner to do this. But the medium for me is so much better than writing too. Because even if you and I sat together for an hour every week and I like forced me to write something, it would be so much more painful for me than this. So even finding that like overlap of what is easiest for you to produce versus what you want to do long term is I think important. And then it's about like just don't stop, right? Like we've done this for more than a year now, a year and a month, and things are growing. And it's because you just, as long as you know that the content and the message is good and that it's helpful for somebody out there, it's about the longevity of how long you can do it.
Keep at it. Don't
Stop.
stop thinking about
Oh,
tomorrow.
I was
Don't.
singing, don't stop believing. So we started off with the same two notes, the same two words, and then I was going to go totally down a rabbit hole.
Oh, there was another one. Don't stop. Get it. Don't.
Yeah.
What is that song? I don't even know what that song is, but that's all I can think of.
I feel like it's way more high pitched and faster, but yeah.
Oh, really? I was thinking it was a rap song.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not going on that route because I don't know rap at all. And I certainly am the most white girl ever and could never sing it. So,
Well, both don't stop thinking about tomorrow and also don't stop believing.
and don't stop thinking about us. We're
Yeah.
pretty cool. We love being here. So, wait, there's one last quick thing I wanted to add, and that is the importance and power of the ask. If you're going to build your personal brand, you're going to have to get comfy with asking for what you want. The audacity. And I really like that is a big differentiator between people who do all this work to create a story around themselves and it goes nowhere. And a really good example, I have so many examples this week. I think we were doing the first episode this year, the live one on failure, and Eric from Doc was on. He also runs the Superpath community, and he's an awesome guy. We talk behind the scenes. And I think I called out on the podcast. I was like, Alex hasn't invited me to be on his podcast yet. And I know Alex actually better than Eric because he used to be a client of ours at Animals. And so like I've caught up with him for years. Like I visited him when we were in SF last year. And so I'm just like, guess what? A few weeks later, I emailed Eric and I was like,
I don't know if that's the ask or public shaming being the thing that works, but just if you build a personal brand, you also get to publicly shame your way into opportunities. So let that be the lesson for today.
but we did do a lot of asking in the beginning, asking for
Yeah.
people to review it, to help boost awareness of the show by sharing it. We really did reach out to our close community and ask for support, and it did help. It helped with that early credibility.
Yeah. If you want something, you have to actually go do it. Right.
People will make time. When I got that list of CMOs, I was kind of behind. I was like, I got to get prepared for this episode because we're going to be recording. I was like, "Can you do it this week, actually?" Like, I was like, and then another thing that I sent to someone to contribute to our newsletter, I was like, "I know it's short notice, but can you do this by Friday?"
I prefer short notice over long notice, anyways, because I'm going to do it in the last 24 hours before it's due. So if you give me 24 hours, then it's off my to do list rather than giving me stress for 3 weeks.
It's just cool how many people wanna say yes and do
Yeah.
say yes, no
Yeah.
matter whether they know you or not, or it's a reasonable ask.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. The world is a good place. Don't stop believing.
Yeah, and I don't think I have anything else to say to that. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow. Don't stop, 'cause it'll soon be here. It'll be here.
Before
Yesterday's
yesterday's gone.
gone.
Yeah.
Yesterday's gone. Ooh, don't you
Don't you
look
look back.
fine?
Don't you look back. Why is it when they say don't you look fine in a whole song about like yesterday's gone, don't look
Wait, are you
back.
serious?
Yeah.
I always thought they were saying, "Don't you look fine?" I was like,
Like
"Fine, girl, yeah."
every other message is about looking forward, moving forward, and then it's like, by the way, you're hot right now.
I mean, that works on me.
Oh, that's really good. I am like literally tears streaming out of my eyes right now for both that song
No,
and
that's
that
how you end
ending.
the show. That's it
Boom.
right there. Okay, y'all, that's a wrap. Thank you, as always, for listening.
We'll be back next week. And just remember, you're doing great. You're doing great.
30% of you are doing great. The rest, you got to get your shit together. Come on.
You know which side you're on this week.
You know.
You know. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm like a teenage boy, a 10-year-old boy, just very straight. It's why clothes always fit me. You know, I'm good at like
Oh,
off the
yeah.
rack
You look good
sizing.
in everything.
Yeah, because it's like I look like a 10-year-old boy, and I have a boy's name. So
Well,
yeah.
I have an 80-year-old woman's name and probably an 80-year-old woman's body too.
No, you don't. You do have an 80-year-old woman's name though, but it really works on you. I'm not gonna lie.